I'm Max Brantley with the Arkansas Times on a beautiful Monday, April 27th. With news in Arkansas today, I'll probably begin with some catch-up because the news today and breaking news is kind of slow. Asa Hutchinson, our governor, was on Meet the Press Sunday, and he was asked about the same-sex marriage case that's going to be argued before the Supreme Court this week. And Hutchinson struck his usual moderate tone. He said, you know, that while he supports the law against same-sex marriage in Arkansas, that he has to recognize there's diversity on this issue. Young people are changing, and we need to have tolerance when we talk about these things. Well, unsaid there and unchallenged by the show was the fact that Asa Hutchinson supports a range of discriminatory laws in Arkansas and has flatly refused to do anything about it. I think at some point the rubber's going to have to meet the road in Arkansas, and he's going to have to do like some politicians have done and said flatly that they favor discrimination against gay people because it's a matter of their religious beliefs to do so. Mike Huckabee, for example, again repeated in Iowa while speaking to a heavily religious audience his belief that same-sex marriage is just a step toward criminalization of Christianity. Kind of an unbelievable statement, but he wasn't alone in saying it. Several other Republican presidential candidates seem to think that creating something of a holy war out of the presidential race is a solid way to proceed in the Republican primary. They may be right. We perhaps should be happy that Asa Hutchinson is at least nice about his discrimination and not quite so ugly about it. News developed over the weekend both at the Arkansas News Bureau of Stevens Media and on the Arkansas Times blog about curious activities in Dennis Milligan's office. He's a new state treasurer. He promised to bring in a new cleaner day after Martha Schaffner's tenure. You remember she was convicted of taking a bribe in the operation of her office. Well, so far Dennis Milligan has illegally hired a relative. He hired a legislator's wife with some questions about whether proper procedure had been followed. There have been questions about his contracts. He's found a way to slip a state office contract to the son of one of his chief workers. He got the rules changed so an unqualified worker could get a top-paid job in the office. Several of his employees, who are also veterans of Mike Huckabee's era, worked for the American Cancer Society while they were campaigning for Milligan. There's some suggestions that perhaps they worked for Milligan on Cancer Society time or using their phones. That's a nonprofit organization that's supposed to stay totally clear of partisan activities. The merits and demerits of this office add up. I think we're going to hear more. We've learned now that one of his chief aides was out prospecting for business, private business, and representing himself as an employee of the office back in December before Milligan took office. This could be a scandal in the making for one constitutional officer. And interestingly enough, Milligan has problems in part because he defeated a popular Republican in the primary, Duncan Baird, in part through trying to extort him out of the race by threatening to release some damaging information about him. So he made some enemies there, and so his problems are not likely coming from Democrats, but more likely coming from within his own party. News today in North Little Rock. The federal government has given $1 million to the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. This is an outfit that hopes to encourage private entrepreneurship. Governor Hutchinson said this is a sign that Arkansas is open for innovative business, and we should hope that's so. Some reading that I hope you'll catch up on by going back to the Arkansas blog was a fine piece that we cited written in Education Week by Justin Minkle, a national award-winning teacher in Springdale, who is another person like I did in the column last week who's taken some exception to the high praise for the new school report cards that reduce school grades to a simple letter grade A through F. Justin Minkle works in a school where most of the students are poor, most speak English as a second language. They've had tremendous success in advancing children from difficult circumstances to do better. They've won awards, they've won big grants for at-home work, they work with families to help them integrate into the community. It's a great school by everybody's account. It's a D school. It's not a D school, and that's what Justin Minkle says, and I think that illustrates pretty sharply some of the shortcomings of our new grading system. Entergy late Friday announced a $167 million rate increase request. That means a 13% rate increase for residential customers. The interesting part of the proposal that it seemed to me is they want to increase their rate of return on investment, that is their profit, from 9.5% to about 10.25% on all the money they spend on equipment. It's sort of a guaranteed profit. It's a monopoly enterprise. A 10% return on investment these days, when people in a savings account are lucky to get 1%, is a pretty hefty return. It's going to be interesting to see if a PSC that includes a new member appointed by the governor and that will have a participation by the Attorney General's office, who's now a Republican and not a Democrat, and unlike Dustin McDaniel, who frequently fought rate increases, might take a different view of these matters to see how it turns out. There was sad news over the weekend. We learned of an Arkansas connection of a death in the Mount Everest earthquake and the resulting avalanche that struck the mountaineering range. All the deaths, there were 4,000, are terrible, but we learned that one was Dan Friedenberg, a Google executive who went to high school at Norfolk High School, and like many bright young people from rural areas of Arkansas, went off and finished his high school at the Arkansas School for Math and Science in Hot Springs, went on to Stanford in great success. He was apparently a huge mind, a fun person, an adventurous person who loves climbing high mountains. His loss is great, and I think it does give us cause to think how lucky we've been to have ASMS that produce the kind of people that have gone on to some great things in the technological world, if not in Arkansas always. The Clinton Foundation remains under scrutiny in addition to the reports about contributions from people who perhaps have other political interests. There have been some mistakes made on the tax return, the foundation said. Some of its shortcomings have been in failure to comply with what were voluntary guidelines. There's no indication yet of true illegality or criminality or things that are not otherwise disclosed in other places. In fact, what are known about some of the mistakes are because there is so much available on the public record, but it's going to create a fog about Hillary Clinton's presidential candidacy, and there's no doubt about it. And every foundation probably ought to be subject to the kind of scrutiny the Clinton Foundation is getting. The story is that most of them are not, and that's something that's worth considering in the story as well. Read Rock Candy, our blog by Leslie Peacock, the greatest art writer in Arkansas, about V.L. Cox's time in Washington with her End Hatred display, a series of doors that are meant to evoke the racial period when whites only were allowed in certain doors. It's a response to the laws that have been passed here recently that are meant to discriminate against gay people. Eloquent statement by V.L. Cox. I encourage you to read it. Sad news over the weekend. Bill Valentine, the legendary general manager of the Arkansas Travelers, died at 82. There are friends of his that think the Travelers are past due putting a plaque in the stadium for him, but as you may know, Bill Valentine was an irascible figure, and at the end of his days had been on something of the outs with the current team management. But he was a larger-than-life figure, a fun guy, and he loved a good glass of wine, and that's not a bad thing. Finally, tonight is the one-year anniversary of a devastating tornado in Faulkner County. There are remembrances all over, and there's not much that can be said about that, but the building goes on, and ever watchfulness is always the message in Arkansas, which is a dangerous place weather-wise. I hope today stays nice. I'm Max Brantley. I'll be back tomorrow.